Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Pope Francis dies at age 88 at his home in the Vatican. He's being called a global ambassador of peace, hope, and love. Plus, Monday marks the final day of early voting across Canada as advanced polls see record numbers turn out over Easter weekend. And BCN speaks with Stephen Harper's former official opposition leader, Stockwell Day, about the current election.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks for joining us. Catholics around the world are mourning the death of Pope Francis. He died early this morning after a long bout of double pneumonia. He was 88. The Vatican says the cause of death was a cerebral stroke that put the pontiff into a coma and led to irreversible heart failure. Meanwhile, the Vatican bells toll at St. Peter's Basilica as visitors gathered following the news to pay tribute.
It's just a very sad day. It's honestly, I think, impressive that he made it to Easter. I think that's almost like a miracle for Italy. But it's sad, and I feel like many people might not have realized it yet because it was very recent. And I think tonight is going to be very sad for everyone.
Yeah, we are really sad about it. We come from Australia. We were hoping there was some chance to see him, but then we heard about it when we came in here, and yeah, it's pretty much devastated all of us.
Just last Thursday, the Pope visited a prison in Rome. Francis had visited the prison many times to perform the annual Holy Thursday ritual of washing the feet of 12 people to reenact Christ's humble gesture of washing the feet of his 12 disciples before his crucifixion. Vatican officials had said that at the time his health was slowly improving. The Pope's last day, Easter Sunday, was marked by an appearance on the loggia balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, meeting the faithful in the piazza below, and a private meeting with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. The Archbishop of Toronto, Cardinal Frank Leo, called Francis a global ambassador of peace, hope, and love who cared about others. The Catholic Archdiocese, meanwhile, of Edmonton has weighed in, saying the Pope's 2022 visit to Canada was a significant milestone towards healing and Indigenous reconciliation. Francis traveled to Alberta to apologize for the Catholic Church's role in Canada's residential school system. Archbishop Richard Smith says Francis wore his heart on his sleeve and that he serves as an example of opening one's heart to those who are hurting and finding new ways to share the gospel. The death of Pope Francis has set off the process of allowing the faithful to pay their respects finally to him. The first will be for Vatican officials in the Santa Marta Chapel and then in the Vatican St. Peter's Basilica for the general public. A burial must take place between the 4th and 6th day after his death, following by 9 days of official mourning. During this period, cardinals arrive in Rome to participate in a conclave to elect the next pope. An international group representing victims of clergy abuse says Pope Francis was a symbol of hope and renewal within the Catholic Church for many. But Ending Clergy Abuse Global says his papacy fell short for survivors. The group, led by a Canadian activist, says that Francis made apologies and held private meetings with survivors, but he didn't implement a universal zero-tolerance policy toward clergy abuse. It says without such a policy, the Church is failing to hold clergy accountable for their roles in enabling, concealing, and perpetuating abuse. Today marks the last day of early voting in Canada's federal election, which witnessed record turnouts over the weekend. Nearly 2 million people across Canada voted on Friday alone, the first day of advanced voting. Here in Lethbridge, BCN has heard reports of people waiting in line over 90 minutes. With Election Day a week away on the 28th, residents are anxious to put in their votes to tackle the top key issues on their minds.
The world is falling apart right now. Of course it's important to vote. You know, the Americans want to take over Canada. We got to save our country and vote for who we want. We thought we'd come in advance to make sure we got our vote in. We actually had a line up there. We had to wait about 10, 15 minutes, but I'm glad we've done it because everybody should get out and vote. You know, the world is in a big mess and we need to help put it right.
Elections Canada has also confirmed to BCN that residents in Lethbridge can participate in special ballot voting on Tuesday at the local Elections Canada office at 640 13th Street North until 6 p.m. Tuesday is also the deadline to vote by mail. Monday kicked off the final week of election campaigning as party leaders scattered across the country. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre made a stop in Toronto. Poilievre was in Scarborough this morning, where he promised to build 2.3 million homes over the next 5 years.
For the young Canadian trapped in your parents' basement, for the renter unable to save up for a down payment, for the senior worried about eviction after rents have skyrocketed, like the retired truck driver in his 70s who drove a truck for 50 years and then told me that he was being rent-evicted and he was going to have to call his daughter, his little girl, and ask if he could move into her basement. For all of these people who work so hard and done everything right, my message to you is one of hope. You will have a home that you can afford, a place to live, a place to be safe. That's the Canadian promise.
Poilievre also says his party will release its costed platform on Tuesday. The Liberals and NDP both unveiled their costed platforms over the weekend. Today, Liberal leader Mark Carney made a stop in Charlottetown PEI to promote his health care plan that includes spending $4 billion to build more hospitals and clinics and train more doctors.
The most pressing need in our healthcare system is for healthcare professionals. Right now, more than 6.5 million Canadians don't have access to a family doctor or nurse practitioner. We'll help tackle this shortage by working with the provinces and territories to create more spaces in medical schools like this one and more residency positions so trained doctors can gain experience. We'll also help doctors with the costs of opening a community practice, whether it's the space itself or the medical equipment that they need. And we'll work with the provinces to make sure that our healthcare professionals can work anywhere in Canada as part of a drive for free trade in Canada by Canada Day.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, meanwhile, was in Nanaimo, British Columbia Monday, where he promised to cover essential medicines by the end of the year in an expansion of pharmacare.
We've got to expand pharmacare. So my announcement today is New Democrats in the first year will fight to expand pharmacare to include essential medications. That's all the most prescribed medications in year one. We've heard so many heartbreaking stories of seniors cutting their pills in half, skipping prescriptions, parents who look at the cost of the medication that they need for their kids and then look at their bills and say, what do I choose? What do I give up? That should not be a choice that anyone in this country makes. And so we're going to fight back and make sure we expand pharmacare with the ultimate goal of having a completely universal and public pharmacare for everyone in our country.
With only days to spare before Canadians choose their next government, a person well known to our residents has become vocal. Stockwell Day, the former leader of the official opposition in Stephen Harper's government, says that the outlook for our next election looks to have a Liberal Party form our next government. He also places blame on the Liberals for the declining support for the NDP.
The polls indicate that he hasn't really, and his polling numbers continue to drop. So what you're going to see is the people who were previously voting NDP, which is, of course, a significantly leftist vote, some of those, a good percentage of those, migrating over to the Liberals, which is why the Liberals are keeping their spending high and talking about keeping taxes high because they know that will attract NDP voters. So it's an interesting collaboration that's taking place sort of before our eyes there.
Catch my full interview with Stockwell Day, former leader of the official opposition in Stephen Harper's government. That is coming up right after Business News. Our partner station, Merit TV Canada, is continuing its election truck tour across the country. The 18-wheeled billboard rolled into our nation's capital yesterday on Sunday, Easter Sunday, that is. It's spreading election awareness and encouraging Canadians to vote. Along the way, the truck's crew is talking to real Canadians on the road. You can find those videos on the Merit TV YouTube channel, as well as its Facebook and Instagram. We can tell you that the truck will be in Medicine Hat on Friday, April 25th, and then in Calgary and Edmonton on Saturday, the 26th. When it's in your area, we'd love for you to come out and snap a selfie and tag us on your social media. Meet our crew and tell us what issues matter most to you in this very important election. Civil servants and healthcare workers in BC who were harmed by COVID-19 vaccine mandates will have their day in court starting Monday, April 28th. A certification hearing for 2 class action lawsuits will begin in BC Supreme Court in Victoria. The 2 lawsuits were launched on behalf of thousands of unionized healthcare workers and ambulance service paramedics harmed by COVID-19 vaccination orders. All 3 plaintiffs who launched this class action were fired from their jobs over the mandates. The plaintiffs are members of the BC Public Service Employees for Freedom Society and the United Healthcare Workers of BC Society. The Freedom Society was formed to support medical privacy and bodily autonomy for civil servants and all of British Columbians. Dr. Sunil Sukram has been temporarily appointed as interim chief medical officer of health for Alberta as the province works to finalize the candidate who will take over that role permanently. In a statement, Alberta Health says Dr. Sukram has served Albertans through emergency medicine throughout his career, and they thank Dr. Mark Joffe for his service and dedication over the past 3 years. When we think about knowing how to manage our money, we usually think of it as an adult task, overlooking how important it is to learn this skill from a young age and, of course, teaching it to our children. Well, Your Kids' Own Money is the book written by Juanita Enns, which tackles the main pillars for living a money-smart life.
In the first pillar, we start the children taking their money and organizing it and getting it growing right away. That's the first pillar. So you're taking advantage of time. And then the other pillars are teaching them more and really start learning how to become experts around those areas. And then that will increase their income. So that's a great way to get kids focused. You know, a great age is even 4 or 5, like where they're able to touch money, like understand, to take see the visual picture of what the pile looks like, how big it is. It's so empowering. The book teaches not just how to organize money, it also teaches them how to produce before they can start consuming.
According to Stats Canada, household debt is one of the Canadian economy's largest financial vulnerabilities. Household debt levels have reached historic highs in part because it has become easier and more attractive to incur debt. It's do or die for the Lethbridge Hurricanes as this Wednesday will play host to a critical Game 7 matchup against the Calgary Hitmen. The Hurricanes initially began the second-round series with a 2-0 lead before the Hitmen stormed back by winning 3 straight, including 2 consecutive overtime wins. The Canes were able to force a 7th game on Saturday with a 5-1 win in Lethbridge. Oh, there it is. With a few days between games, the Canes say this will give them the opportunity to rest and rejuvenate after what has been a tight physical series.
Yeah, we got a couple days, which is nice, get everybody rested up and everything. So it's nice that we can take some time and really get our game plan dialed in and play the way that we want to play. I think it'll be a tight checking game. I don't think there'll be a lot of room out there. There hasn't been all series, and I think that'll continue. So I think you're going to have to work for every opportunity and just try and make the plays that you can.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure's on, but it's really just another game. We know how to play. We know what it takes to win. We've won in their building before, and we've shown it in this series, so it's nothing new.
Well, obviously it was a big-time gut check win by our group. Really impressed with specifically our older guys, how they were able to play, but also get the younger guys to play. And it wasn't easy to come back after 2 overtime losses, and especially how Friday went down. To show up how we did on Saturday was very exciting.
puck drop for Game 7 is in Calgary this Wednesday at 7 p.m. The winner of the series will move on to play Gavin McKenna and the Medicine Hat Tigers, who swept the Prince Albert Raiders in the second round. Exciting stuff. Well, south of the border, this one could have ended badly. A Delta Airlines airplane with almost 300 passengers and crew caught a fire before it was supposed to take off at a Central Florida airport, forcing the evacuation of passengers. And it appeared that the fire started in the aircraft's right engine. The airline said crews evacuated the cabin when flames were seen in the tailpipe of one of the plane's two main engines. Passengers have returned to the terminal building, and Delta said it will bring in additional aircraft to help get the customers to their final destinations today. Oh boy. Also south of the border, according to some mainstream media reports, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth created another Signal messaging chat that included his wife and brother, where he shared details of a March military airstrike against Yemen's Houthi militants. He responded to his second alleged Signal chat while at the White House Easter egg roll today.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. And on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter.
This is the second time the White House has come under fire for allegedly using Signal, the encrypted messaging service used by tens of millions of users, to discuss sensitive foreign policy. The last time this happened, a journalist was accidentally added to the chat. And speaking of the White House, more than 40,000 people were expected to participate in Monday's White House Easter egg roll, where President Donald Trump remembered Pope Francis as a good man and said that he signed an executive order putting U.S. flags at half-mast in recognition of his passing. He also declared that religion is back.
Easter is special, and it's one of our favorite days. It's one of our favorite periods of time. We're honoring Jesus Christ, and we're going to honor Jesus Christ very powerfully throughout our lives, all throughout our lives, not just now, all throughout our lives. We're bringing religion back in America. We're bringing a lot of things back, but religion is coming back to America.
I love how the bunny was nodding there. That Easter egg roll looked like a lot of fun for those kids, too. And speaking of Easter rituals, in San Francisco, there's an Easter tradition that sees adults dressing up in costumes and competing in the big wheel race. Remember those kids' plastic tricycles? Well, they hop on those things and try to navigate the city's windy streets. Take a look.
Bring Your Own Big Wheel, or as we like to call it, BYOBW, is an event in San Francisco that is free to do. You come with a plastic children's tricycle, preferably plastic, and you race it down one of San Francisco's windiest streets for fun.
It's just so much fun. I mean, this is like my Halloween. I get to dress up. We go down the scary hill. You drift, you smash into people, and like this costume originally should have a skirt, but I was like, you could get banged up pretty bad, and pretty much your costume will be disintegrated like after a while.
It's a San Francisco tradition. Me and the community that I come with, my friend owns like 13 of these, so it makes it super fun to have a tradition every year, and it's a San Francisco classic. I would say it's frenetic right at the beginning, because you all are on the starting line and everyone's just trying to outpace each other as you come around those first corners. You see people crashing left and right, and it becomes a lot of chaos. But if you pick the right line and you weave through everybody, you know, you can be a winner.
That looks hilarious, but also very dangerous. You need to wear a lot of padding, I think. Well, here in southern Alberta, our Easter Monday started out overcast, but grew darker and darker, then finally unleashed some drizzle on us. We saw a 60% chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorms today, but you know what they say, April's showers bring May flowers. I will be right back with a full look at the weather next. Okay, I know that they say April showers bring May flowers, but what about April flurries? What do those bring? May frost? Okay, so we had 60% chance of flurries this afternoon and changing to 60% flurries. I actually saw those flurries before I came in here and did this weather report, so that those raindrops turning to snowflakes. And here's the unfortunate thing that could actually last overnight into 30% chance of flurries by Tuesday morning. We are also looking at a high of 9 degrees, so staying in those single digits, still within seasonal though. And then by Wednesday, that's when we're going to make that jump up to double digits again, high of 12 degrees and sunny skies. So looking at 15 on Thursday, up to 18 degrees on Friday with those clear skies. Now Saturday and Sunday, we're going to see some of those April showers again, high of 16 and 14 though, respectively, for our upcoming weekend there. So mostly in that seasonal range, except for some of the overnights are getting into the minuses, but average high for this time of year, 15, average low, 1 degree. 25 was our record-breaking day on this day, happening back in 2009. And 1967 saw the record low in Lethbridge, which was minus 13. Sun rose this morning at 6:27, sunset this evening at 5:34 p.m., giving us 14 hours and 7 minutes of daylight. Yeah, so days are definitely getting longer. As we look to the national forecast now, over on the west coast, seeing lots of clear sunshine there. High of 14 in Victoria, 13 in Vancouver, high of 12 in Edmonton with a mix of sun and cloud. Now Calgary seeing a 30% chance of early morning flurries. Should clear up later on in the day, high of 6 degrees there. Looking to the rest of the prairies, mainly cloudy skies sitting over Saskatoon tomorrow, high of 6 degrees. Regina could see some wet snowfall turning to showers or drizzle by the afternoon, high of 3 degrees, and high of 10 in Winnipeg, looking at some scattered showers there as well. Looking to the rest of the country here, the central part of the country, mainly cloudy skies in Toronto, high of 13. Now Ottawa and Montreal both seeing a 40% chance of showers or drizzle and high winds as well, up to 50k winds in Ottawa. 60k winds is where Montreal is going to sit tomorrow. 11 for the high in Ottawa and high of 13 degrees for the expected high tomorrow in Montreal. We're going to see a lot of rain showers as well in the eastern region here, so Maritimes. Fredericton, high of 6 degrees, 8 degrees for the high in Halifax, high of 9 in Charlottetown, and a high of 4 degrees, and St. John's could see snowfall mixed with some rain there as well, along with 70k winds. There you have it. That is your forecast. Historians say museums and other archival institutions looking to buy artifacts from Hudson's Bay will likely need some financial help. Canadian and Indigenous historian Cody Grote says archival institutions in Canada are chronically underfunded. Grote says this means their acquisition budgets will likely not have enough to purchase items expected to sell for significant amounts, like the Royal Charter that established Hudson's Bay 355 years ago. Documents filed as part of Hudson's Bay creditor protection case say the company has about 1,700 pieces of art as well as more than 2,700 artifacts it will auction off once it receives court permission to do so. DHL, the international courier firm, announced that starting Monday, they will stop collecting and shipping orders from businesses abroad to private individual customers in the U.S. if the declared custom value exceeds $800. The suspension is temporary, and will be in place until further notice. This announcement follows a change in U.S. Customs regulations governing which items need to be formally declared upon entering the country. An updated policy effective April 5th lowered the threshold from $2,500 to $800 for shipments to require formal declaration. 3 weeks of court hearings kicked off today in the U.S., where Google is facing off against the U.S. government. The hearings are aimed at determining how the tech giant should be penalized for operating an illegal monopoly in the online search world. A parade of witnesses are expected to testify, including Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Industry experts say secondhand stores could benefit from the rising cost of new clothing thanks to U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war. Retired fashion executive Jan Genovese says she sells her unwanted designer clothes through customer-to-customer marketplaces, but would consider high-end secondhand sites if tariffs cause retail prices to rise. The secondhand clothing market was already flourishing before the specter of tariffs hit the U.S. fashion industry. Management consulting firm McKinsey & Company predicted global revenue from pre-owned fashion would grow 11 times faster than retail apparel sales by this year after the COVID-19, as shoppers look to save money or spend it in a more environmentally conscious way. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 183 points to 24,008. The Dow was down 971 to 38,170. The S&P 500 was down 124 points to 5,158, and the Nasdaq was down 415 points to 15,870. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $1.30 to $63.38 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 19 cents to $3.05 US. Gold was up 97.53 to 34.2380 US an ounce, and silver was up 16 cents to 32.67 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.84 per bushel, barley is at $6.90, canola is at $14.92, and corn is at $8.17 per bushel. Live cattle were down 5 cents to $209.77. Feeder cattle May contract was down 132 to 285.52, and lean hogs May contract was up 62 cents to 91.02. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 72.30 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Pope Francis died today. He suffered a stroke and irreversible heart failure. He was 88 years old. Up next, our federal election could be one of the most important ones in Canadian history. We hear from former political party leader Stockwell Day, who gives us his thoughts. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Here we are in the final week of the election trail. So what are our politicians promising, and who will Canadians put their trust in? Joining us today is the Honourable Stockwell Day, former leader of the official opposition and former cabinet minister and Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Conservative government. He's also currently serving as the president of Stockwell Day Connects. Welcome, Stockwell. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Jeanette. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Okay, only a week to go, and the polls are showing the Liberals with an 8-point lead. So what do you make of that?
Well, if you're a conservative, it's concerning, but we used to like to say, we always say during an election, always run as if you're a few points behind, because that may be the reality. Polling is really tricky these days because so many people do not even bother answering either, well, certainly landlines, but even if they see that that it's a polling survey, many don't answer. So it's always tricky, but there is a trend line, and the trend line, to be honest, looks like the Liberals may have a bit of an edge here.
Okay. The Liberals have now released their costed platform, and Mark Carney is promising to spend a whole lot of money. So what do you think of his plans?
Well, if you look at them carefully or even just quickly, you'll see that spending is clearly on their agenda. And that's at a time where, certainly as a small c fiscal conservative, I believe, and having worked with leaders who also believe that we've got to be a little more circumspect about our spending and keep deficit down, because if you can't keep the deficit down, you're not going to keep your interest payments down, and it makes everything less affordable. So I'm concerned, quite honestly, about the Liberal trajectory. There doesn't seem to be enough emphasis on really reining in spending, and that's going to be a real concern going forward.
Now, the Conservatives have not released their costed platform just yet. Poilievre is saying that this will happen Tuesday, but the NDP have released theirs. And again, big spending and higher taxes for the wealthy. So do you think Jagmeet Singh has found any traction in this last week?
The polls indicate that he hasn't really, and his polling numbers continue to drop. So what you're going to see is people who were previously voting NDP, which is of course a significantly leftist vote, some of those, a good percentage of those, migrating over to the Liberals, which is why the Liberals are keeping their spending high and talking about keeping taxes high, because they know that will attract NDP voters. So it's an interesting collaboration that's taking place sort of before our eyes there.
What do you suspect that Poilievre's will look like?
Well, you'll see a little more fiscal restraint. You'll see a real focus on one of his concerns that he continues to focus on is affordability. And really the fact that we live in a time, and I was just talking about within my own family here, where we used to, when we were starting out as young families and married and becoming upwardly mobile, we used to be able to have a pretty good chance of getting a down payment together and affording a home. And that seems to be more and more of a fleeting hope. And what you're going to see, I believe, from Pierre Poilievre and his team will be ways in which that'll be more achievable and things becoming more affordable. Part of that is, of course, reining in the public debt, but it's also making life easier for small business and for people who are just trying to get ahead.
Now, Stockwell, we keep hearing this election is about Canadian sovereignty and the threat of Trump tariffs, but do you think this is the case, or are there more pressing issues like affordability? I mean, after all, Trump's only been in for 3 months now in office, and there were a lot of issues prior to that people weren't happy with.
Well, great question, and it ties into that because everybody knows that tariff wars usually do not turn out very well. As a matter of fact, the history book of successful tariff wars is a pretty thin one. So I'm concerned about tariffs. I certainly was when I was Minister of Trade. Pierre Poilievre, very concerned about those also. So it really underlines the emphasis on keeping our own spending priorities in line in terms of the Canadian government, because the less you're able to control your own spending and therefore taxes and therefore debt, the less you're going to be able to fight a tariff war. So the tariff issue is big. Pierre has shown that he's very adept and he's being very aggressive against the U.S. approach right now, against the Trump approach on tariffs. So it's going to be, tariffs are figuring large in this election for sure.
Do you think this election is really about Canadian sovereignty?
Well, we keep hearing that President Trump is talking about 51st state. We know that, he sees the world certainly from a lot different point of view than most Canadians. And Pierre Poilievre and the vast majority of Canadians do not see Canada as a 51st state by any means. Part of, I think, analyzing Trump over the years, he likes to come in with a bazooka. I'll use that analogy. And then when you only feel like you got hit or punched and not hit with a bazooka, you feel like you're coming away ahead of the game. So he comes in, he'll come in talking about a 51st state, hoping that that will create some chaos and over-exaggerated fears. But I think what you're seeing right now is Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, being pretty level-headed on this. They're not going to let that throw them off their target of keeping Canada strong, keeping Canada in a strong fiscal position. But it's certainly part of what Trump uses as a strategic and maybe even a long-term goal. I don't think it'll ever be a reality, but it's something that he's tossing out there to keep people on their back feet, so to speak.
Keep us on our toes for sure. Now, Mark Carney has been under pressure over his refusal to reveal his assets, tax havens, and his alleged Chinese business connections. So far, this hasn't seemed to have put a dent in the poll numbers. So any thoughts on why these issues seem to be just bouncing off?
Yeah, it's pretty clear to me, and it's not a surprise, that mainstream media clearly leans to the left. That's something nobody really argues about. And so they want to see a liberal government continue, just as they wanted to see Justin Trudeau stay in place. They want to see Mark Carney stay in place. So they will mention those things, which you've quite rightly just raised, but they won't overemphasize them. And the problem there, Jeanette, is elections in democracies like Canada, where you've got, two main parties, are largely decided at the end of the day by the undecided voters. And undecided voters, which anytime can be, 6 to 9 or 10% of the vote, they largely will be affected by the last people they talk to on any issue. And the last people the undecided hear from is always mainstream media. So that's the concern. Mainstream media knows that, and so they don't overly focus on that. These are items that should be focused on. Their mainstream is not focusing on them, so a large part of the undecided aren't hearing the concerns that are very real related to Mr. Carney.
Interesting. So Pierre Poilievre has been bringing up tough on crime and public safety issues. So how big of an issue is this in the key Ontario and Quebec swing ridings, do you think?
Well, it's a concern, and it's interesting you mentioned the two provinces because they look at things somewhat differently. In Quebec, of course, immigration would be a much higher concern. It's somewhat of a concern in Ontario for sure. And it really comes down to the question of illegal immigration. And most people who are new Canadians or even have been first and second generation Canadians are united on the fact that illegal immigration is a concern, not just from a Canadian safety point of view, but if we're hoping to push back on the tariff attack that Trump has launched into, we do need to show that we are responsible when it comes to the types of people we're letting into our country. So those issues are of a concern, and Ontario and Quebec, they do share those concerns. Again, it's really important to be focusing on them along with these issues of affordability.
Mm-hmm. Our national debt is massive, and that really needs to change. So if we think about what this means to future generations, obviously we want to see change there. But voters don't usually like to hear about spending cuts during an election. And Pierre Poilievre says that we should cut back on foreign aid spending. And Carney says Canada needs to extend compassion to the world. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, you have to look at the type of foreign aid that our own Canadian taxpayer dollars are going to. And is it going to support programs in other countries that we think are valuable and helpful to that country? So foreign aid should be looked at. Are we supporting bad actors out there? Are we supporting programs which we would never support in Canada? That's where the focus needs to be.
You understand how government functions, obviously. So where else can we cut back on spending to rein in our huge debts?
Well, we've got to take a realistic approach to the size and the growth of government. We live in an era where technology and AI is providing fantastic ways to reduce costs. It used to be that even someone in my position running a company, you'd need sometimes maybe 2 people or maybe 3 people just to help with scheduling and travel, et cetera, an executive assistant type of thing. And now with AI, you can do that virtually in a very minimal way when it comes to personnel. So that's just one small example, Jeanette, of right across the board. AI is helping us to be more efficient. So you do not have to be increasing the size of government at any level, municipal, provincial, federal. We need to see a reality come into place. You don't have to be saying you're going to just lay off all kinds of people. You can just say you're holding the line, but the Liberals are not doing that. The increase in the number of public servants being hired across the country through the Trudeau years and now into the Carney years, it's staggering, really. And that's a long cost. Every time you hire a full-time government employee at any level, that's about a 50-year commitment in terms of financially. And if you're going to try and reduce that, it becomes very expensive. So let's look at the size of government. Let's look at the way we are doing things. And there are some achievable savings there without being really disruptive. But we've got to correct this this out of control increase in the size of the public service right across the country.
So shrinking government. I think some people sometimes get a little bit iffy when they hear AI taking over people's jobs and stuff. It's the world we're living in.
Yeah, and the great thing is you can use AI to say, okay, we're not looking at mass layoffs, but where can we, you look at just attrition, Jeanette, the number of people that are retiring every year. It used to be about 11 to 13% of the public service retiring. So you don't even have to come in swinging, and saying, oh, we're just going to slash the public service. Let's make it more efficient. Let's be aware that thousands are retiring every year. You don't have to be continuing to increase the size, especially with the technological capabilities that we have now.
Yeah, you mentioned people retiring. So here's an interesting twist in this election is that seniors are leaning towards the Liberals and the younger people towards the Conservatives. So traditionally, younger folks don't show up in big numbers to vote. So is this going to be a problem, do you think, in this election, particularly for the Conservatives?
Well, I think it could be, and I say as a parent, but also a grandparent, the tremendous opportunities we had when we were young in our 20s and 30s, and getting together a down payment for a house, for instance. Young people don't have that now, and so I'm saying to my fellow parents and fellow grandparents, hey. Look, we're approaching the end of the line. Let's be realistic about that. But our kids and our grandkids are not. And to continue this liberal pathway of upward spending and no regard for the cost of living of young people, we're actually kind of being selfish towards our own kids and our own grandkids. So, we're going to be okay. We'll eke it out. And, I don't want to sound morbid here, but we'll eke it out in our remaining years. But let's give our kids and grandkids a chance. Those chances will be very limited with an ongoing liberal program.
All right, it looks like we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I'm going to ask you one more question here, Stockwell. What kind of character traits should Canadian voters be looking for in their next PM?
Well, clearly truthfulness and integrity and being willing to speak to a position, whatever it might be, and not just be controlled by, oh, is this going to cost me some votes? I mean, there's a couple of issues out there. The gender issue, for once, for one, Pierre Poilievre has been very clear that he thinks girls should be protected as far as sports goes, not to be having to compete against biological males, and protected spaces for women in that regard. He's been very clear on that. And Mark Carney hasn't. He keeps dodging the issue. And then you go from there to something like an environmental issue like pipelines. Pierre has also been very clear that we can safely have pipelines built that would be able to export our refined products even to places like Europe so that they don't have to depend overly on Putin, or to places like China to get them to reduce their coal. So we could increase that and still see global emissions reduced. But there's the whole fear that, oh, well, are the climate activists going to get upset and take away some of your votes? So questions like these require integrity and require a leader who's going to say, you know what? I'm going to take the right position on this. I'm going to say and do what is right, not just what's politically correct. On that issue, obviously, I lean towards Pierre Poilievre making those kind of policy statements.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, looks like we're out of time here. Stockwell, thanks so much for taking your time, taking time with us to share your views about this next coming election.
Great to be with you, and thanks for everything you do with your show in terms of reaching out to Canadians.
Well, the battle for Canada continues with election 2025, and the future direction of our country is on the line. So joining me in studio to chat about our federal election is Tanner Naday. He is an economic analyst from Lloydminster. He's a political commentator and public speaker. Tanner, welcome. Great to have you as our first studio guest since COVID.
My pleasure. Thank you for having
the
me.
inaugural one here. So great to have you with us today. Now, Tanner, the main focus so far in this campaign seems to be the tariff war and who can best stand up to Trump. So is this a long-term thing that we need to be worried about, or is it perhaps being used as a fear tactic to gain political advantage? What do you think?
That's a good question. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think the main thing that Canadians ought to be concerned about is the Canadian federal government using the tariff war or the tariffs to justify all of these policies which I think are damaging for Canada. So my concern is the Canadian government using the American government to justify these policies which make no economic sense whatsoever. So I have no doubt, and we all know that the government right now is using the tariffs to justify very radical moves, or will indeed do so in the future if they're allowed to engage in that sort of action. So that's my ultimate concern.
Yeah, so you're against reciprocal tariffs?
Yes, absolutely. That doesn't help Canada. It harms Canada, and we're very foolish to try and engage in a trade war with America. That isn't something that we ought to do. No, instead, I think we ought to the best of our abilities, open up trade in the markets and demonstrate how free trade is beneficial to both countries and enables the flourishing of both countries to increase, not decrease, rather than what we are trying to engage with the American administration right now.
Yeah, your opinion's not much different than a lot of the people that we've been interviewing.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Now, Tanner, the polls continue to show a Liberal Party lead, but the Conservatives are narrowing that gap. So how much weight should we be putting in the polls?
Well, that's a good question too. To be entirely honest, I put all the weight on Jesus Christ. I don't put much weight into polls precisely because it's man's wisdom. I don't think it's Christ's wisdom. And so it might be that right now it says that Carney is winning or is going to win the election and Poilievre is going to lose, but I'm confident that the Lord will have his way. And maybe that does mean that Carney wins, perhaps. Maybe Poilievre wins. I don't know. What I do know is that, Almighty is sovereign and his will be carried out. So how much weight to put into polls? I would say not as much weight as I put into Jesus Christ.
Okay, yeah, and polls can be so deceiving
They can.
too. Maybe they're basing it on 1,500 people.
Of course. Oh, of course. It's
Right.
so difficult to do statistics. Absolutely.
Yeah. So certainly affordability, another major issue in this election, along with the housing market. And then it looks like both Carney and Poilievre are promising these GST cuts on new homes, but I'm guessing it'll take more than that to fix things.
Yeah.
So as an economic analyst, what do you think needs to be done to make housing more affordable?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Far more needs to be done than just cutting GST. We've had these low interest rates in Canada for how many years? They were artificially low, right? They were set to be so very low, as to then entice individuals who otherwise wouldn't be able to purchase a home to purchase a home. To be entirely honest, they didn't have the capital that was required to do so, but they were told by these low interest rates to buy right now. Now is the time to buy. It's cheap. And then when the lockdowns came and people were, working from home, that demand only increased. More and more people wanted a nice home to live because that's where they were working. And so with that increase, that spike in demand brought on by low interest rates and the lockdowns, you saw this massive jump in prices. Because of course, every builder knew there was money to be made right now. And along with this massive immigration that the country has, people need places to live. Lots of people need places to live. The demand continued to rise, and with that, an increase in the price of homes. So what do you do to stop the problem? Well, first, I'm convinced you have to cut immigration. I think it has to be zero, to be entirely honest, because you have to slow the demand, right? The first thing you do when the bathtub is overflowing is turn off the tap, right? You don't wait to do that. You do that first. And then you have to allow interest rates to move as they want to move. It's wrong to artificially restrict them so that they're so very low, giving these buyers a false impression of what the market is actually like. So there are multiple steps that need to be taken simply to introduce common sense into the interest rate markets and just the market in general, again, to try and stop the housing crisis.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, here's an interesting one here. So, Tanner, one of the strange things about this election is to see that seniors who typically lean towards the Conservatives are supporting the Liberals these days. Well, the young people have now switched to leaning Conservative. What do you think is the driver behind that?
Well, I think with regards to the seniors, I think many seniors are concerned about change. You know, they've lived as they've lived for many, many years. And what Mr. Poilievre is proposing and Mr. Bernier and so on too, are the change is radically different compared to what the Liberals have introduced and implemented in Canada over the last 10 years. And so I think there is a real fear among seniors that if there's this massive change, this large shift, that, you know, their way of life will be disrupted seriously. But on the flip side, the younger generation, we can't afford homes. We can't afford to, you know, work only one job. We can't afford to have children and so on. And we're realizing that the economic situation is so much worse than what has been told to us by so many individuals. And so you can only deny reality for so long. You know, it's no wonder young individuals want to change. This way of life that they've been promised is not coming to pass. And so they're, you know, they want to try and make something different to increase their chances of having this life which we, you know, which we desire.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the economy needs a major boost, doesn't it? And the Canadian public is now asking for coast-to-coast pipelines to be built. And it looks like Mark Carney has noticed this and is now promising to speed up major natural resource project approvals. But earlier in the campaign, he went on record stating that he will not repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, as it's known, right? So what do you make of this, Tanner?
Oh, that no pipelines will be built under Mr. Carney. You know, Bill C-69 is so damaging for the energy markets. It allows so much regulatory uncertainty into the markets that investors who want to build big energy projects in Canada really have no desire to do so, because there's no guarantee that after they've built their project, the federal government won't shut down that project. And therefore, that investor might lose billions and billions of dollars. And so you have all of this hold up right now in Canada's economic markets. And unless you repeal bills like C-69 and C-48, that hold up won't go away. It won't be reduced. And so I think Mr. Carney's talk is just that. It's all talk.
Interesting. Okay, so Tanner, there's a lot of chatter in Western Canada with regard to the possibility of Alberta and perhaps even Saskatchewan separating, especially if Carney wins. So what are you hearing? Is this just talk or is it serious?
No, I'm hearing the same. There is a lot of talk about this, about the movement for independence and separation. I think it is serious. I think Albertans and the West at large, for that matter, is tired of the way that they've been treated over the last not just 1 or 2 or 5 years, but decades on decades on decades. And we're realizing that we've realized that what Ottawa is trying to pursue right now will completely transform our way of life into something that we do not want it to be. So yes, that momentum for independence right now is roaring. And I think should Mr. Carney be elected on the 28th, it's only going to explode.
Wow, interesting to see what will happen there. So Pierre Poilievre continues to make tough on crime an election issue. And he's made some announcements. So he's promising this 3 strikes and you're out legislation, which would see criminals found guilty of 3 serious offenses facing a minimum prison term of 10 years. And they could be designated as dangerous criminals, or dangerous offenders rather. So some are arguing this is much too harsh. So what do you think about
They're wrong. It's not much too harsh. I think we live in a country right now that has been far too soft on crime for a very long time. Sometimes it seems like the only way to avoid jail in this country is to actually commit a crime. So I'm very much in favor of strengthening our justice system compared to what it is right now.
What kind of character traits should Canadian voters be looking for in a prime minister?
Well, right now I'm looking for a prime minister who's righteous. I want a man who will follow the law and do what is right according to the scripture. That's what I want first and foremost. And I want a man or a woman who has an air of statesmanship and doesn't engage in this new progressive Marxist nonsense, and instead wants to see the Canadian flourish and see the Canadian family flourish. That's what I'm looking for in a prime minister, and in the government at large, for that matter.
You mentioned faith being very important. Obviously, that's what you're looking for in a leader as well. So what would you then say to Christians watching who may be hesitant to get involved in the election?
You must be involved. You know, there's an old quote that says, you know, you might not want to be involved in politics, but politics will be involved in you. We have the great privilege of being able to be involved in our government and in our in our political process that so many people around the world do not have. And I think it a shame and a disgrace to not be involved in that process, considering the privilege has been given to us. And if we are not active in the political process, then I think we deserve everything which is coming to us. If we have an opportunity to ensure that we can maintain or increase our rights and freedoms, then we have an obligation to do so.
Okay. So, Tanner, what's your prediction as to the outcome of this election then? Who will win and by what margin?
That's a very good question. Like Chesterton, you know, I prefer to prophesy after the event already occurs. So I might say my prediction is, well, as I said at the start, the Lord will have his way. You know, I really don't know how the election's going to turn out, but I'm confident that the Lord will have what he desires in this election. We're right now living in this stunning age, you know, that is unprecedented in Canadian history, with the rise in independence, or at least the momentum for independence, with the younger generation transforming the political arena, or at least trying to, and becoming more and more involved. And I'm very encouraged to see all that's happening in the country. I'm very encouraged to see just how many people are starting to realize and have realized that perhaps Canada's government isn't all that they say they've cracked up to be. You know, so much of what's been told to us is coming out to be deception, and we're looking at how we can be involved to make our lives better, and how we can champion the family and champion that structure which has been neglected for so many years. So I'm very encouraged. I'm very excited about the future, and I have full confidence that yes, if we work as hard as we can, and if we do what's been commanded to us, then the outcome will be very positive for us as a people.
It's really different times right now, and this feels like such a different election. Do you think that the outcome will be higher in terms of voter turnout?
Oh, yes, I would imagine so. I would think so, especially with how Mr. Poilievre has galvanized so many Conservatives to his rallies. I think the Liberal side and the NDP side and so on of the political aisle recognize that and see that, and I think it will galvanize them too to head to the polls and vote for Mr. Carney or whoever they choose. So yes, I would expect a high voter turnout. If it wasn't high, that would surprise me.
Yeah, and you mentioned Poilievre there, and it's interesting to see that rally that he had in Edmonton the other day, the number of people that came out when Edmonton, I know provincially Edmonton's a very NDP town, right?
Yes.
So did that surprise you to see that number of Conservatives, I guess?
Well, yeah, I don't know that it would surprise me. I mean, it was an incredible number, no doubt. But you know, Alberta's going to vote. I mean, you never want to predict the future that you don't know. But of course, we expect Alberta to vote Conservative. So to see that number of individuals coming to Mr. Poilievre's rally in Alberta, in Nisku and Nisku Leduc area, I think again just shows how people are looking for a change, and they want to support someone who they believe will help rescue them from this last decade of Liberal rule.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Tanner.
My pleasure.
Really appreciated having you in as our first in-studio
Yes.
guest since COVID.
How exciting. Thank you for having me.
Times are changing. Tanner Naday is an economic analyst and political commentator and public speaker. We were so blessed to have him today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.